This weekend I preached on the gospel where our Lord tells us that He is the vine and we are the branches, and He uses imagery from the growing of grapes, something that would have been common in the ancient Near East, but apparently, and much to my surprise, is something that most people in Central City and Boswell are no longer familiar with. It seems that in days of yore, people always had grapevines in their backyard and they used them to make wine and jam and whatnot. I still have a number of them at home, and recently I visited here at the Sacred Heart Sisters' Mother House in Crescent, and Sister asked me, in light of the fact that she asked me to trim her grapes, to say a few words in relation to the gospel. First thing is this: grapes by their nature want to go back to being wild grapes. You remember wild grapes? So you go out in the woods and you swing on the grapevine, and those are grapes that have gone wild. They're untamed, they're unkempt. And as a result of that, they produce no fruit. They just put all of their energy into growing longer and longer vines that become more and more entwined and complicated. Instead, grapes that produce good fruit need to be pruned. These are called canes, and if you know anything about pruning grapes, you cut them back to a certain number of buds. But when you cut back grapes, you'll realize that probably 75% of last year's growth you throw away, and that can seem so counterintuitive. A friend of mine owns a garden center in Latrobe, and he was telling me, that's my hometown of course, that this year is going to be a good year for fruit. Now when you see all of these buds and you know that's where the fruit comes from, you think to yourself, well, then just let them grow out and produce more and more fruit. But if the grapes put their energy into growing longer and longer canes and it's not put into the fruit, they produce very little fruit, and it's not very good. Our Lord uses that image to describe all of us, how He prunes us, how He trims us back so that we may produce rich fruit. And one of the things that you notice that if you trim grapes, especially if you trim them later in the season, maybe a little bit after they should have been trimmed, they start to bleed. They emit a certain sap. Let's think about that in our own life, because one of the ways that God prunes us is that He allows us to share in His own sufferings. As followers of Christ, we hold up as the central image of our faith the cross. That it's a central part of our life, that if He is the vine and we are the branches, that means we also share in suffering, but it is redemptive and it's something that can lead to new life. How many of us in difficult moments, when we have lost all means of escape and we can no longer weasel out of things, maybe it's in our sickness, it's in our pain, it's in the times that we have been betrayed by others, do we find that those are moments that can break us, but they can also be moments of great spiritual growth? If we don't pray, maybe it's a moment where I weasel out of praying, or I don't want to focus on certain parts of myself, and that's why I don't pray. But sometimes in a moment when I can no longer escape, when I am in a spot that it's really difficult, it's then that I really open up deeper and more profound areas of prayer. Maybe it's a moment when I needed to make a change in my life and I refuse to make a change. I've long said the only way I'm going to ever lose weight is if I'm drafted into the military, right? Because otherwise I will find every excuse to weasel out of losing weight or stop eating lunch meat and cookies for every meal. There are moments in life, though, when we can no longer weasel out of it. And those are moments when Christ allows us to share in His own suffering. It takes the suffering reality that every human being knows about and it elevates it to something higher. And it can be a moment of great despair, but it can be a moment of great redemption, a moment of renewed understanding of myself and my relationship with my Creator. God prunes us sometimes in suffering, and just as grapes sometimes when they are trimmed late in the season, they begin to bleed, so too sometimes we bleed in those moments. Grapes need to be trimmed in order to produce rich fruit. When you cut away 75% of the growth, as I said a few moments ago, it seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't I let it grow? So too in life, there are things that we need to let go, and they seem so accessible and so easy. And just because something is possible, it doesn't mean it's right. Look, it's not against the law to hold a grudge. And we've all been wronged. It might seem like a waste to let it go. But God calls us to let it go. He calls us to be pruned in that way. Throw it out. It might seem hard for us to forgive, or it might seem hard for us to not tell a lie, or not to gossip, or take another person's name. But that needs to go. It needs to be cut away so that we can redirect our energies, not to just things of futility, not to places where we tear each other down, but to places where we build each other up. We can commute our energy into growing longer and longer vines that become chaotic and tangled up. We can spend most of our life doing that. Or instead we can say, Lord, you put me in this situation. Help me to grow. Help me to focus on the good things that you offer to me, a life in abundance. Our last point is this. In the gospel, our Lord says that if branches will sometimes be cut off and they wither. And I'm looking down here at the ground, and I cut these last week, sister. I don't know why. I don't know why you didn't rake the place up yet. But you look at these old vines that are here, and they wither. Think about people you know. I know people that have addictions. Deep pain inside of them. Good people, by the way. Smart people. Fine people. But their addiction has allowed them to wither. Just a shell of where they could be. Maybe that's in a more typical addiction, but maybe it's in ones that are a little bit more subtle. If we push away the divine life, if we don't cooperate with the graces that God gives to us, we can wither as well. We can stay wrapped up in ourselves. We can allow ourselves to become bitter and disheartened and burned out. We too wither as people. One of the greatest lines from the early church fathers says, the glory of God is humanity fully alive. To be fully alive, that's what our faith is about. Not a diminished existence, but a better existence. So what happens to us in life is going to make us bitter, it's going to make us better. Are we going to see those as moments where we're being pruned and our priorities are being reoriented, sharing in the very redemptive suffering of Christ? Are we going to allow ourselves to wither? These grapes are pruned, and I hope the sisters have many good fruits this year. Right now, is God pruning us? Is He trimming away in us so that we would bear good fruit, that our energies would be directed towards the good things that our Creator has set before us? God bless you. Let's keep each other in prayer, and let's lift and build up one another.